As you might have seen through that skit, deservingness in immigration is a very important subject in today's modern era. Today, millions of people are often turned away or often rejected in order for asylum or visas in many countries simply because of where they're from or where they look like. Deservingness is a very nuanced topic in immigration and in global borders. Throughout the class, we talked about numerous various topics, one of them being deservingness in immigration. Week 7's reading by Sokud referred to as certain groups being more deserving than other groups. For example, some other examples I can think about today are people from African nations or in the Middle East often often receiving less aid or less assistance compared to their white counterparts. For this project and for this video essay, I really wanted to answer the question, what is deservedness in immigration? How do we see it? And how can we combat it? Coming from a family who in today's modern standards would be considered a less deserving immigrant, I've seen and I resonate with what Week 7 teachings and what the teachings throughout this class has taught me as well. Deservedness in immigration is often a huge problem. What Who is deserving? That's the main question. Who is deserving of immigration and who isn't deserving as well? I've worked at a refugee support center near my house called Refugee Support Services, where I manage multiple events from families from different areas around the world, ranging from Myanmar to Congo to Zimbabwe and Afghanistan. I've met with these families and I've talked to them about their various experiences while immigrating to the US and what type of hurdles they had to deal with. They talked to me how other immigrants were oftentimes had an easier experience compared to them simply because of where they were born or what their skin looked like. To me, that's not fair. Like, who is deserving of immigration and why is that? Alright, let's talk about the history of deservingness in migration. While most of these policies fortunately no longer exist, the effects of them still lingers to this day. Nations providing special treatment for people who come from these settler colonies, for example, the UK having immigration laws that specifically favor people from wealthier settler colonies within the Commonwealth by having them attend specific universities found in these former settler colonies, having a special occupation listed required to gain easier access to visas, having a required banking number in their bank account for like £5,000, etc. Then former exploited tributary colonies within the Commonwealth that they simply do not have due to years of exploitation, discrimination, and inequality. Understanding this needed context is required for us to discuss the current climate that deservingness immigration has on modern-day policies. In recent years, debates over deservingness in migration have become increasingly contentious, reflecting anxieties about globalization, identity, and state sovereignty. As previously mentioned, under the UN General Assembly Article 5, states have the right to enact their own migration legislation that determines who can easily migrate within their nation. While this is under the guidelines to protect the states, there are often plenty of migration laws that mirror those that oppress the movement of Native and Indigenous people under imperial rule. Policymakers and politicians in various Western developed states are currently framing migration policies under the lines of, we helped these people in the past by sending millions in humanitarian aid. Why do we have to continue to keep helping them? Or, these people are taking labor and jobs from our country.
They took our jobs! Yeah, they took our jobs! They did! We're in the moving business. 14 years we've been working our butts off. Now these future folk come in and we can't get work nowhere. Well, they took our jobs! They took your jobs! They took your jobs too!
What about us in the fast food business? The restaurants are firing us because the future people work for a lot less.
They took our jobs! They took your jobs! They took your jobs! Took your jobs!
It's affecting kids, too. Me and my friends started our own snow shoveling business. We were trying to be responsible and make money, you know? But then the people from the future came along, and now we're out of work, too. Oh, they took our jobs!
They took your jobs! They took your jobs! They took your jobs!
We must place protection measures
to make sure that this does not continue. Additionally, these policies often draw on stereotypes, prejudices, and xenophobia to justify the reason for their implementation. Addressing deservingness in migration requires reckoning with the legacies of colonization and confronting the structural injustices that shape patterns of migration and access to citizenship to this day. In the next section, I'll talk about some of the modern implications that because of the history has. Understanding the history behind how the idea of deservingness in migration arose then brings us to modern implications of it. Many countries still maintain immigration policies that reflect colonial ties, preferring some colonies over another, just like how I mentioned in the last section with England and some of the Commonwealth settler colonies. For example, the United Kingdom's Commonwealth Immigrant Act of 1962 gave special treatment to citizens of Commonwealth countries, especially those who harbor more UK citizens and settlers in them. Likewise, France maintains close ties with their former colonies in Africa, which they use to influence immigration policies and visa regulations for citizens of these various nations, especially in West Africa. What's interesting is France actually owns some part of West Africa's CFA franc. The CFA franc is West Africa's pretty much universal currency that they use for trade, commerce, and international trade as well. However, the CFA franc is actually pegged to the euro, which is owned by the European Union. It used to be pegged to France's previous currency. This effectively gives France an economic leverage in Western Africa, as they are the ones ultimately maintaining their money and maintaining some of their economic policies as well. These policies are used to influence policies enforced by Western African political officials that favor and go along with French international and foreign policy as well. Pretty much, Western Africa is getting the short end of the stick, while France will always have an economic advantage in Western Africa. Cultural assimilation on migrants did not stop after imperialism, however. Migrants from former colonies often face problems and challenges in preserving their cultural identity while navigating integrated processes, legislation, and cultural nuances that prioritize assimilation into the dominant culture. This can lead to tensions between migrant communities and host societies, as well as feelings of alienation and marginalization among migrants. In order to try and avoid this issue, nations might enforce policies that prioritize a particular group of people over another who they deem to be more suitable to adapt to their respective cultures. During the European refugee crisis in 2015, there were many instances where Germany chose Syrian refugees into their nation due to their perceived culture and linguistic compatibilities, as well as their respective high level of education compared to other refugees and migrants in the area. This ultimately was driven by the belief that Syrian refugees would integrate more easily into German society and contribute to the country's economy way more compared to other refugee groups. This tension further leads to polarization between supporters of these exclusive migration laws, as well as people might cling to this misunderstanding and uneasiness for reasons that these policies should be implemented and enforced. Economic exploitation plays a big part in migration laws as well. In the movie Babel, you see the varying perspectives of different characters from around the globe and see the distinct impacts that world events have on tourism and migration. Babel revealed the side that is unknowingly affected due to others, specifically wealthier individuals from more developed countries in the West, actions that affect migration. When Susan, the American citizen in the film, was shot during her time in Morocco due to a misunderstanding and cultural misunderstanding, the world placed various restrictions on the nation of Morocco and its people. This restricts a whole nation due to them simply being associated with a tragedy that the majority of the country has nothing to do with. Similarly, we witness policies like this all too often in today's modern era with people from the Arab world, due to multiple years and decades of civil and political unrest where nations do not even recognize them and are suffering as they enforce policies that further restrict their movement. These former imperialist countries profit from having unfair trading policies and relationships with these nations and people who are deemed as undeserving, further plunging the people in the various nations into economic stagnation, economic crisis, and further brain drain that further harms the economy of their respective nations. In the United States, certain refugee populations have been prioritized over others based on perceived economic contributions, similar to as you might see in Germany. For example, refugees with specialized skills or education levels that are deemed beneficial to the U.S. economy, such as medical professionals, engineers, and computer scientists, may receive expedited processing and preferential treatment in resettlement programs. Conversely, refugees from countries with lower levels of education or economic development, due to these imperialist factors I mentioned before, may face great scrutiny and longer processing times simply because of where they were from. Deservingness also plays a major role in who gets citizenship and who doesn't in a specific country. As I mentioned before, some ways that citizenship are determined is by someone's economic status or where they come from. Programs like the U.S. Resettlement Initiative also fast-track citizenship as well. However, the U.S. is not the only country to be doing this. Certain groups may receive citizenship faster based on cultural or economic fit within a host society. For example, highly skilled migrants, investors, or individuals with significant financial resources may be fast-tracked through citizenship processes through investment-based citizenship programs or skilled migrant pathways, like the U.S. Resettlement Program. This program is prevalent in countries seeking to attract talent or investment, such as the United States, Canada, or various EU nations. Additionally, refugees who are perceived as having valuable skills or resources that align with the economic needs of the host country may receive expedited pathways to citizenship. For example, refugees with professional qualifications in high-demand fields like healthcare or engineering may be prioritized for citizenship due to their potential contributions to the host country's economy and society. Again, this reaffirms the notion that if you have higher economic resources, are able to get a better education, and if you come from a nation that is able to culturally assimilate into the host society, then you will receive special perks that most refugees simply do not have. As emphasized throughout this whole section, the prioritization of certain groups of refugees and migrants over others reflect the overall societal attributes towards migration, cultural assimilation, and economic integration in world migration and movement. These examples emphasize how past imperial legacies continue to shape migration patterns and policies of many nations till this day under the guidelines of sovereignty. This often continues to perpetuate the inequalities and hierarchies based on cultural, economic, and geopolitical values and factors. While it might seem like that combating deservingness and migration might seem like a lost cause, there are actually various things that we can do in order to combat it. For starters, getting involved with refugees or migrants in your area can be not only personally rewarding, but can also combat deservingness. For example, here in Charlotte, I used to be an event manager and coordinator for Refugee Support Services, a refugee help center here in my city. There, I organized events and coordinated with multiple families, specifically Afghan families, Congolese families, and Zimbabwean families, to not only navigate life in North Carolina and Charlotte in order to adapt to the culture here in North Carolina, but also let them have an avenue to showcase their own unique culture. Last winter, I helped organize a winter festival for these families to show off these cultures. There we had food from around the world. We had a clothes drive to help refugee families and also just foster great connections with them. It was a very fulfilling experience, and I hope to do it and continue during my time here in Pomona. But that's another day. That's for another video. Going against certain legislation that harms migrants and refugees is also good as well. While you might not be able to do it on a large scale or national scale, you are able to do it in a much smaller local scale. You can help lobby for legislation that help refugees or go against legislation that harm refugees and migrants. Additionally, just hearing the stories of refugees and migrants goes a long way in fostering connections with them. As I mentioned in the previous section, one of the reasons why some of these policies are being implemented is due to cultural misunderstanding between various groups. Connecting with refugees and migrants in your area just by getting to know their name and learning about their various stories can help go a long way. From personal experience, I know this. I used to have not so good of a view on migrants or refugees as I live in Charlotte, North Carolina. However, because I was involved with refugee support services and because I actively seek to discuss and engage in dialogue with these migrants and refugees, I learned so much about their stories, and I can truly tell you that everyone is deserving to be helped. These are human beings at the end of the day, and they deserve to be helped. We ought to do it as a moral reason, as a moral right. While this topic is still incredibly nuanced and complex that we might not be able to answer it in a short 15 to 20 minute long video essay, I can assure you that we together can combat deservingness and migration. We can combat the various former oppressions that oppress certain people so that they can have a chance for a better opportunity that we have as well. Thank you for watching.